So a couple of sort of housekeeping notes. There's not a large crowd here, but I was going to mute everybody and just let Catherine present, and I'll let her introduce herself. And if you have any questions, well, at the end, we will have a Q&A. While she's presenting, if you do have a question, feel free to type in the chat. Karina will be monitoring the chat. Quick question, does anybody not know how to use the chat? And just put up your hand. And I think we're all good with chat. That's good. All right. Oops, somebody else is joining us here. All right, a lot of things going on the screen there. Okay, so again, welcome. I am the CEO of the Riding Association, the Federal Riding Association. Officially, it's the Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound Electoral District Association for the Green Party of Canada. And I am actually stepping down in a month or so because of personal reasons. My wife and I are going abroad, so we are looking for another CEO, as many of you have probably already heard. But if you know someone who would be willing to step into that role, or if you yourself are interested, please let me know. I guess that's pretty much it. I guess I will pass the time over to Catherine. Oh, actually, no, there is one more thing. There is one more thing. Okay, this is an information webinar, which will be presented by Catherine. So this is not to be a heated debate. This is a safe space. So if you have questions, by all means, feel free to ask, but we have to remain civil and respectful. If anybody gets out of line, I will mute them. I'm hoping that's not necessary. So without further ado, Catherine, you're up.
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I was actually really thrilled to be asked. I'm speaking today on the land of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Neutral people on the Haldimand Tract in Waterloo. And a little bit about myself, I actually have worked an entire career in healthcare in a variety of positions in senior leadership, in clinical roles, and also as a professor. I retired right smack dab in the middle of the pandemic, which I wouldn't advise to anybody, along with moving to Waterloo in the middle of the pandemic. I did do a lot of policy and governance work professionally, and that's kind of what brought me to being interested in working in the policy work for the Green Party of Canada. And so what I'll just do now is maybe start to share my screen and pick up the presentation, and maybe we can get going from there. And we'll just have people joining us as they arrive. So just so everybody knows, I can't easily see people when I'm doing the presentation mode in Zoom. So if there's any real technical problems or issues, somebody's going to probably have to call out and let me know that. Okay, but without further ado, then we'll get going. I am a member of the Policy Development and Process Committee, and I will be speaking to that in just a minute. So a little bit of context for tonight's presentation before I go over the agenda. I am not here officially representing the Green Party of Canada. I am here as one Green member speaking to other Green members who happens to have experience on a committee and hopefully some knowledge that people would find useful. Certainly any of the information on the Green Party of Canada website would sort of supersede anything I say if I make any errors. I'm hoping Karina can keep me honest if I do, because I know she's here on the call tonight. So what we'll do is we'll also talk a little bit about the Policy Development and Process Committee's role, why we actually have a proposal process in the first place, the types of proposals, and then we're going to go through the actual proposal process, which is basically 4 steps: the submission of proposals, the online categorization vote, the convention or general meeting, and the post-convention vote. And then at the end, we should have plenty of time for questions. So I'm hoping, if it's okay, people will be all right with holding those to the end. So the Policy Process Committee is the term that's actually used on the party website, but we actually now call ourselves the Policy Development and Process Committee. As you can see, that's a really big handle. So we actually often refer to ourselves as the PDPC. And the members of the PDPC actually applied for the role and then were appointed by federal council. And really what we're responsible for is shepherding member-driven proposals through the process. So we set the timeline, so we would open up and sort of put a call out for members to start drafting and submitting proposals. We decide when that needs to close. And then we work all the way, the timelines all the way through up to saying we're now ready to have a policy convention. We actually work with the people that are submitting proposals to make sure that their proposals meet the drafting standards. Well, we'll also work to try to identify if there's conflicting or overlapping proposals and try to bring people together to work out, do they actually maybe want to combine their proposals, or what's the best way of moving forward? We arrange for the members' consideration, which is really a fancy term that means we make sure all the proposals are up on the party website so everybody has an opportunity to read them. And then we make arrangements for the timelines of the online categorization vote that a lot of people refer to as the Bonzer. We're also the committee that receives the online vote results. And then basically what we do is we make sure everything looks like it's okay. And then we make sure that that gets shared with members on the website as well. And then a subgroup of people that serve on the PDPC actually will work at the convention. And we'll talk a little bit further in the presentation about what some of their roles might be. So the best place to actually start is why we actually even have a proposal process in the first place. And the reason for that is that the Green Party is a grassroots organization. So that means that we as members get to decide what the party will do if it's elected and how the party is actually governed. It's really our way of speaking truth to power. It's how we actually create change. So if you want to influence how the Green Party will govern Canada, then you would submit what's called a political policy proposal. If you're more interested in changing how the party is governed, well, then you would do a directive to federal council or a constitutional proposal. The way the party actually defines a policy is that it's a principle-based statement which does not contain any specific strategies or tactical statements. And the reason for that is we want our policies to endure over time. And the other thing is that it gives our members of parliament flexibility on how to actually operationalize our political policy policies based on the current circumstances of the country. So just think about how much technology has changed in renewable energy, even over the last 5 or 10 years. There may also be legislative hurdles that members of parliament have to get through. There may be things going on in the economy that would influence how a policy could be implemented. So those would be other considerations. And probably from my perspective, as someone who has a lot of background in policy, is that to me, the biggest issue is that the Green Party does not have a record management system for the Green Policy Book. So that means that every policy that's been passed by members since 1988, and that's over 30 years, is still in effect and has not been reviewed or revised. So that means that we could have in our policy book policies that are now obsolete or no longer relevant to the current times. And to put that in perspective, the Green Party of Ontario actually has a sunset clause that their policies actually kind of get retired and archived after 5 years unless members revisit it and vote to keep them active. And many management systems would actually have criteria in place that policies get reviewed anywhere from every 2 to 5 years, with 2 to 3 years being, in my experience, the most common review period. So political policy proposals are what the party will work toward in Parliament. And they actually also form the background for our election platform. So what happens is the election platform is developed by party leadership. So that would be the office of the leader, shadow cabinet, and probably caucus would be involved in there as well. And what they do is they look at the current events in the country, and then they prioritize specific policies that they think will be particularly relevant at this point in time to Canadians, and they use that to make our platform planks. Directives to Federal Council. These are when membership directs or tells Federal Council to do something. And of course, what we're telling them that we want them to do has to be within Federal Council's mandate or their sphere of influence or control. And the other thing that I think is critically important, which I'm not really convinced has been happening, and this is just my opinion, is that members need to ensure that Federal Council actually acts on the directive. And later in the presentation, there's going to be an example of where we as members failed to do that. Constitutional proposals are proposals that proposes changes to either the Constitution or our bylaws. And what that does is that will actually alter the internal party governance or potentially party operations. So the proposal process has actually got 4 stages in it, and we're going to go through each one of these stages. The first one is the submission of proposals. The second one is the online categorization vote. The third was the convention, or what we often will call actually the general meeting. And then the last piece would be the post-convention final online vote. So this is a really busy slide, and I will go through it, but I was trying to condense a bunch of information in one location for people in case people wanted a copy of this for them to kind of hang on to refer to. So when you're deciding you want to submit a proposal, there's kind of, you start at the top and you have to make a decision. Am I going to do a political proposal because I want to influence how the party will govern the country? Or do I want to change actually how the party governs itself? So that's the first thing that you need to do. Then the Green Party actually has to put out a call for proposals. And that's actually what comes from the PDPC. We say we're ready for a new cycle, open it up, and then members get notified. And then of course, you've made your decision. Are you doing a policy proposal? Are you going to do a directive to Federal Council or a constitutional proposal? And then it's time to start to do your homework. So if you're looking at a political policy proposal, you need to go back and review the Green Policy book. You want to identify, are there policy gaps? Because maybe that's what you want to do. You want to work on something that the Green Party is silent on. Or are you actually wanting to update or revise an existing policy? You think it's out of date and you want to work on it. If you're doing a proposal related to governance, then you need to review the governance documents. So things like our actual constitution and bylaws, reading through them, looking at the terms of reference for the central party committees, maybe reading their minutes, reading the general meeting minutes, looking at things like Federal Council handbook. And all of those governance materials are actually available on the GPC website. You just have to make sure that you're logged in, then you click the members button, and then you get into all of this information. Once you've done that piece, so you've done your background reading, so to speak, then you need to move on to consulting experts. So if you're doing a policy proposal, absolutely shadow cabinet members are going to be invaluable to you. There may be other content experts that you know, either in or outside of the party. There may be relevant research to what you're working on. And the other really important thing is remembering to consult impacted groups. So an example of this that actually happened that was raised at the general meeting in November was there was a policy that related to Indigenous peoples in the far north. And one of the questions that came from membership was, how did you actually include the Indigenous peoples in the north in this process? So that's the kind of thing you don't want to forget to do. If you're looking at how the Green Party governs itself, then you may want to consult internal and external content experts. So that could be things like the Constitutional Working Group, our members of Parliament, Green Party Central Party committees. You may want to reach out to other Green parties across the world to see how they do it. So at this point, then you've kind of gathered all kinds of background information and you're probably feeling, okay, I think I'm ready to get going here. And that's when it would be really ideal to hold what would be called a proposal meeting. And this you can do internally with your own EDA. But now that we've all lived through the pandemic and we're all experts on Zoom, you could actually hold a meeting with people from across the country if you wanted. And then you'll be explaining to them what you're doing, why, and you're seeking their input and their guidance. And then it's time to actually draft your proposal. And in a couple of minutes, I'll explain all the different parts. And then once your proposal is complete, you actually have to submit it through the Green Party website on a submission online form. And one of the things I want to point out here, it's critically important to pay attention not just to the date, but the time that it closes. It's normally in Eastern time. And so if you're in a different time zone, there's people that have run into trouble for that reason. And then at that point, you enter into what I would call the editing phase with the Policy Development and Process Committee. So if you're looking at doing a policy proposal, you have to make sure that it's founded on our green values and principles. So those would be ecological wisdom, social justice, participatory democracy, nonviolence, sustainability, and respect for diversity. It has to be principle-based, so no strategy or tactics. For the reasons that I mentioned earlier, we want it to endure over time and be flexible. It also is really important to not forget that it has to be an issue that's within federal jurisdiction. Should be clear and concise, and it's really important to adhere to the maximum word limits, because what will happen is the editors will come back to you and say it's too long. It's fine if it's too short, it's just if it's too long. So the objective section, the benefit section, and the proposal section all have this 50-word limit. Of course, you want it to be researched or evidence-based, and it needs to be sponsored by at least 20 members in good standing or a unit representing 20 members. So the most typical unit that you would be probably have access to would be an EDA. And people can only submit one proposal per general meeting, not one of each type, one total. And this is an example of a political policy that will actually be coming to the GM in March. The Green Party of Canada will reduce inequality by making income taxes much more steeply progressive, adopting a progressive wealth tax that will be applied to large family fortunes, adopting a progressive estate tax that will be applied to very large inheritances, and taxing income from capital and labor at the same rate. So you can see this is a great example. It's principle-based, there's no strategy or tactics involved, but it's really clear what we want it to accomplish, and it's giving our members of parliament flexibility, and this would endure over time. And it could be, they could actually have they could change it over time and be, charge more tax, for example. If you want to do a directive to federal council, you need to clearly state what action it is that you want federal council to undertake. And you have to identify how that action aligns with those green values and principles that we all hold. And also identify how the action that you are requesting will actually help federal council to more effectively carry out its role to fairly represent the membership. And remember that federal council represents us between general meetings. When there's a general meeting, the members are in control, but once the general meeting is closed, then we have sort of, the power then goes back to federal council to represent us. And of course, if you're asking federal council to do something, it can't contravene or break the rules of the Constitution and bylaws. Once again, it needs to be clear and concise. All those 50-word limits apply. And once again, it needs to be sponsored by at least 20 members in good standing or a unit representing 20 members. So an EDA, for example, would be fine. And of course, the same limits apply to how many proposals you can submit. So here's an example of a directive to federal council that will be on the table in March at the general meeting. And it's directing federal council to establish a participatory constitutional renewal commission led by professionals experienced in drafting constitutions, and based on best practices, draft a new constitution that is well structured, easy to understand, and capable of serving the party well into the future for adoption by members at a special general meeting within 18 months. The final type of proposal that you could submit would be a constitutional amendment. And your proposal needs to clearly reference the current constitutional or bylaw clauses and then what your amendments would be. Also has to identify how the proposal supports and aligns with the Green Party values and principles. And once again, while you can be changing the Constitution and bylaws, you have to make sure that you're following the intent of them. Now, I have no idea why all of a sudden the number of people that are required to sponsor these has changed. So I really can't answer that question. But if you're submitting a constitutional amendment, it has to be sponsored by at least 15 party members in good standing, or a central party unit representing at least 15 members. So that could be a committee or a council, or 3 EDAs. If you're doing a bylaw amendment, it has to be sponsored by at least 5 party members in good standing, or a unit representing at least 5 members. So that could be like the Young Greens Council. And here is an example of a constitutional amendment that is being put forward in March. The Indigenous Peoples Advisory Circle, IPAC, will deliberate internally and co-develop structures and policies with the GPC leadership to substantively address Indigenous issues. To achieve this, the following clause will be added to Article 7.2 of the GPC Constitution as follows. 7.2.7, Indigenous Peoples Advisory Circle, an association of members of the party as specified by that unit. And here's an example of a bylaw amendment that will be presented at the GM in March to replace bylaws 6.1, 6.2, and 6.3 with the following text. Party members shall elect members to cabinet or shadow cabinet. Party members shall elect 2 deputy leaders, and party members may replace members of the cabinet, shadow cabinet, or deputy leaders subject to appeal. So this is all the different components of the submission template. And the reason why I've crammed them all in here for you is you actually can't see this template on the website at the moment. It's taken down. So, and I'm happy to share this with people, but the submission template has all these different parts. So the submitter would be the name of the proposal's lead sponsor or contact person. Of course, you need their email. The objective describes the goal or the objective of the whole proposal with that 50-word limit. The benefit describes why the objective is of benefit, once again with the 50-word limit. Then you have to identify which green principles your proposal supports. And it doesn't have to be all of them, but it has to be at least one of them. Then you have to say what type of proposal you're submitting. Is it a political policy? Is it a directive? Or is it a constitutional amendment? Then you have your proposal statement, and those are the things that I was just reading out to you. Once again, the word limit applies. Does it have a relationship to existing policy? So add would mean that this is brand new. Rescind and replace would mean that you're retiring an existing policy and basically providing something that's more up to date. As far as evidence goes, you can provide up to 5 references. The request is that you describe the reference in a short phrase. You can certainly have the citation there for people to go look at to read more in depth, but we don't really want things on the books that with like 5 pages of references. It gets a bit unwieldy for members to work through. Consultation would be, does your proposal impact any specific groups, and what consultation did you do? Jurisdiction is you specifying that this is federal. And from support, has this actually been presented to any GPC group? So did you actually present it at an EDA meeting, for example? And then at the last thing would be that you have to include the names and the email addresses for all of your sponsors. Just some general information that didn't kind of fit in anywhere else. Just so you know that the submission phase has to be completed at least 3 months before the general meeting. And the reason for that is, one, we have to arrange for translation. Normally, it's mostly translation from English into French, but certainly it can be from French into English. We have to do that member consideration piece, which is when all the proposals are posted on the GPC website. They have to be up there for 60 days, so people have time to look at them. Then we have to do the online vote, and the online vote has to be open for 30 days. So as you can see, we've already got 90 days locked in. If there are going to be any proposal discussion workshops, that is supposed to be communicated to members. I will be honest, for this policy cycle, the committee that I'm on, the Policy Development and Process Committee, we had many roadblocks to trying to communicate with members, and so that made meeting this extraordinarily difficult. And one of the things I just want everyone to know is, because we have this 2-year cycle, we kind of had this mad dash every 2 years for proposals. And the Policy Development Process Committee is very committed to working on a continuous policy process once we get through this backlog of all the proposals that we have outstanding. So the next phase in the process is the online categorization vote. And you'll notice that I said it's categorization, not prioritization. And the reason for that is we're just categorizing them as red, green, or yellow. We're not establishing a rank order about the top proposals all the way down. So if you look at the website, it does say prioritization. So I took the liberty of changing this just because I disagree. So all members in good standing are notified by email that the vote is going to be occurring. You will receive by email a link to Simply Voting and an individualized password, so you actually can't share that with anybody else. As I mentioned previously, the voting is open for 30 days. Many members discovered that their notification email actually ends up in their junk or their spam folder. And all members receive this, even people who have opted out of GPC emails. So if you don't get it, you need to reach out. So the categorization vote is commonly amongst Screen referred to as the bonzer, and it's a color-coded voting process. So red means I understand this motion and I'm opposed to it. So in other words, you reject it. You don't want it to become part of our policy or our governance. Green means you understand the motion and you're in favor of it. So in other words, I think we should adopt this. The party should do this. And yellow means one of 2 things. One, I don't like the wording of this motion or this proposal, but the concept has merit. I just think we need more editing, basically. Or I wish to learn more about this motion. And the reason I underline the second one, and this is absolutely my personal opinion, is we don't really have a good mechanism for people to learn more about the motion. So I, on some level, feel like we're misleading people a little bit. But the other thing is that from my perspective, if you don't have the knowledge base to assess the merits of a proposal, I think that abstaining is a more logical thing to do than saying you want to learn more about it. Because what happens is Greens are very nice people and they don't ever really want to vote red for things. And so they will vote yellow. And what happens then is we generate loads and loads and loads of yellow lit proposals that are very difficult to get through workshopping. So when the results of the categorization vote comes back, the members are notified by email and they're actually posted on the GPC website. Once again, I want to remind everybody that everything that has to do with the member-driven policy process is behind a firewall. So you have to log into the website or you will never find it. So green-lit proposals are proposals that received more than 60% of the votes that were cast were green or supportive. And then what happens is all of those green-lit proposals are put together in a bundle for adoption at the general meeting. Red-lit proposals mean that more than 60% of the votes cast were red, so people rejected it. And those would also be presented as a bundle with the recommendation that members reject them or defeat them at the general meeting. So we actually had no red-lit proposals at this general meeting, not one. Yellow-lit proposals are all the other motions. So what happens to those proposals is that they are sent to workshopping for debate and possible amendment. And then after the workshops are over, all of those yellow lit proposals will come back to plenary again, where they will be each considered by membership. Now the workshop can make a recommendation, but members get to choose what they want to do. The third step would be the actual convention, and I tend to call it the general meeting, but the terms are interchangeable. So the policy plenary is actually the part of the general meeting that is specific to all the policy work for all of them. So it's not just political policies, it's directives and the constitutional amendments as well. So what happens is all the proposals are presented in bundles to members. So the people who are facilitating that plenary will say, we're going to be talking about the green bundles. They will actually bring the bundle up. They will review what the proposals are in there, and they will open the floor for discussion. And at that point in time, members can actually choose to put forward a motion to remove the proposal from the bundle, and they have to give their rationale. So if they choose to do that, then you will see that members will be speaking for keeping the proposal in the bundle, which is now called a motion, or they will be speaking against that and they want to remove it from the proposal, from the bundle. So, and then after people have sort of had that debate on the floor of the GM, then a vote is held. And the decision that you're making isn't about the merits of the actual proposal. You're actually voting whether you want to keep it in the bundle or you want to remove it and recategorize it. What everybody would have observed happening in November were green proposals or motions that were being removed from the green bundle. They were being recategorized as yellow to be sent for workshopping. So out of the November GM, we actually created quite a few more yellow proposals. And so emergency motions, they are also something that will be happening at the general meeting. They are proposals that are being put forward to deal with a new political issue which has emerged after the policy process has closed and for which there is no applicable Green Party policy principle in place. I do have to acknowledge that there is not a good mechanism during the general meeting to actually ensure that there isn't a Green Party policy principle in place. At the general meeting, at the in-person general meetings in the past, on the first day of the general meeting, they actually announce that we're putting a call out to receive emergency motions, and then they will announce when they close, and they will say they have to be submitted by Saturday at noon or whatever the decision is. This was the very first time that we actually opened the receipt of emergency motions ahead of the general meeting. We opened it up, I'm not sure, I think it was 4 or 5 days early so that people had more opportunity to do it. And the people that actually receive those emergency motions that are submitted at the general meeting is the Policy Development and Process Committee. That's that PDPC there. They're the people who receive them. So in November, we received 16, I think it was. We had to make sure that all of those proposals met the drafting standards as much as we could with the time constraints. They had to be translated either to English or to French, depending on how they were submitted. Then we had to make sure that they were available for members to review, and then we had to create a PowerPoint for the emergency motion plenary. And just so you know, virtually all of that work had to happen from midnight to 6 a.m. The Policy Development and Process Committee people who are working at the general meeting, they have the opportunity to provide an opinion about the emergency nature of the emergency motions that have been submitted to the plenary. Now, members don't have to pay attention to that, and it does not change anything, it's just an opinion. And then what happens is the emergency motion facilitators will put up each emergency motion. There is no debate or discussion at this stage. It's basically just read out, and then members have to vote to consider it. So you vote yes or you vote no. And that means, are we actually even going to bother talking about this? Is it actually an emergency or not? And in order to be considered at the general meeting, 67% of members in attendance have to agree that it meets the definition of an emergency and we're willing to consider it. And then if it meets that threshold, it then is treated as a regular proposal. The last stage, this is so dry, honestly, I'm amazed you're just not all asleep. The last step is the post-convention online vote. So our Constitution actually mandates that some things have to go to a post-convention vote. So Article 10.1.3 specifies in our Constitution that all constitutional amendments passed at a general meeting must go to an all-member vote within 120 days of the general meeting. And then the amendment will become effective if more than 50% of the votes cast are in favor of the amendment. The next one that's required by Constitution is actually kind of a messy one, but I'll do my best to explain it. Any amendments related to Article 10, Article 11, or Bylaw 1.2.3 have a two-step process. So just so you know, Article 10 is what we just talked about, amendments to the constitutions and bylaws. Article 11 would be, are we going to dissolve the Green Party or merge the Green Party with another major party? So the one we all hear about is, let's merge the NDP and the Green Party. And Bylaw 1.2.3 is about Green Party bodies maintaining a contact email. So these any of these amendments have a two-step process. More than 75% of voting members in good standing at 2 GMs have to vote in favor, and an identically worded resolution to enact the amendment is passed by a vote of greater than 50% of members in a post-convention vote held within 120 days of the second GM. So those are the only things that are mandated according to our Constitution. And one of the things in the party is generally speaking, the Constitution is considered to be the last authority. So it's really interesting that in our Constitution, there is actually no requirement for a post-convention online vote for political policies, for directives to federal council, or for all the majority of the bylaw amendments, except for the one that was specified a minute ago. And I'll be honest, this is a source of great debate amongst Greens. And those of you that attended in November saw it unfold once again. And what I basically have sort of parsed out from listening to everybody is people seem to fall into one of three groups. Well, one of four. One, many people think it's redundant to vote on an unchanged proposal 3 times. So you vote on it, right, in the online Bonzer, then you vote on it in the GM. It's not changed. Why do we have to vote on it a 3rd time? They just think it's a waste of time. Other people think that I'm more of a middle of the road kind of person. I think if we change the wording in a general meeting, and wording can only be minor wording, it can't change the intent, I think those should go back to members afterwards so they can see it again and vote. And then the other group, you will hear this, is that people will refer to a 2016 special directive to federal council, which requested a constitutional amendment be presented at the 2018 GM, requiring a post-convention ratification vote on all proposals. And this was the directive that members didn't follow up on. So interestingly enough, the 2016 federal directive had a number of components to it, 3 or 4, I think. So members decided that they wanted it to go to federal council for consideration. But in 2018, nobody brought it up again, and federal council didn't do it. And then in 2021, nobody brought it up again. And federal council, of course, had not done it because it became null and void as soon as the 2018 GM happened. So this is really interesting because we as members asked for something, but we failed to make sure or hold accountable the people who were supposed to have completed that job. And then I think there is the group of people that just believe that everything should go to post-ratification vote, and we should just change the Constitution to reflect that. And then that should be written into the Constitution, and then the whole issue would be resolved once and for all. And so basically, I think that's it. I think I'm done. And I'm amazed that you all stayed awake. So I'm happy to stop sharing the screen at this point, and we can all kind of turn our videos on, and then I'm quite happy for people to chat or ask questions or wherever people want to go from here.
Right. So yeah, you're muted.
Britt?
Okay. So it seems like as a member you have an unending stream of input and reflection that's necessary. I've been to one convention online, and but I didn't know anything about the after convention voting, and so this only counts for a constitutional change at the moment, or counted for the after the convention voting.
So I think what actually happened is members, so that's what the Constitution defines. So we actually have to do those things. We have no choice. But in the general meeting, members can decide what they want to happen. So it's very common, I think that happened in our general meeting this time as well, that the constitutional amendments absolutely have to go. And then I think there was a motion that defined everything else had to go as well. And so, yes.
Oh,
Go back to an online vote afterwards.
to it afterwards. Okay.
Yeah.
I noticed. Okay. The other silly question I have is, I know I was a member at the last convention, but I don't know whether I'm a member now. How do I know? How long does it last? Or
Yeah, it depends, because you can sign up anywhere from like 1 to 3 years. I think if you send an email to support@gpc.ca, is that the right email address, Karina?
It's support@greenparty.ca. I'll put it in the chat for anybody that's interested.
And if you email them and let them know that you are not sure if you're still a member, they will answer you. The other thing is, if anyone in your EDA has access to GVote, they might be able to just look it up for you. It just depends what's easier for you.
okay.
And it's important to check, because there is often your membership will lapse and you won't be notified. And so it's possible that you could get caught out.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Did you have another one?
No. I want to lower my hand.
I didn't see any coming in the chat, Eve. I don't know if anybody has questions.
I have a question.
Sure.
You had mentioned in terms of support, you need 20 people or support from a group. So let's say you wanted support from an EDA. So what does that mean? Is the executives sign the support document, or what exactly does that entail?
Yeah, so as long as it's the EDA has 20 members in it, you can use that as the unit. I think that the true spirit of that intent, though, would be that you would have at least presented your proposal to the EDA at a meeting. I understand that not all the members would necessarily be there, but you would, have an attempt to do that. And then, the EDA people in attendance can make a decision that, yes, we do support this. We're happy to put the EDA down.
Probably, if I can add on to that, you probably would want a motion from the executive, just so that you have written proof somewhere, or minutes from the meeting, just to be able to prove that you did have the EDA's support. On the off chance that somebody asked you and you weren't able to prove it, right, somehow. So,
yeah, that's a really good point, Karina, because I know I received one of the emergency motions, and what they had actually attached was a copy of the EDA meeting where they had put the emergency motion presented, and then it was passed, and that's what they used as their proof.
Does anybody else have questions that's here? Just feel free to either put them in the chat or raise your hand.
I think they're all asleep.
Oh no.
Well, you're right, Catherine. It is dry, but it is
so dry.
But it is very interesting and informative. I mean, I learned a few things, and I had read up a bit about the policy process. So I'm glad that I tuned into this and got to find out a few other steps in the process.
Yeah, and I mean, if people think of questions, I'm more than happy. They can email me. I'm more than happy to answer them. If people want a copy of sort of some of the slides or anything, I'm happy to do that as well.
All right. Well, if there's no other questions.
Oh, I think Douglas has one.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, that was my question, in fact, Catherine, whether the PowerPoint is accessible or available, because I think that's a very good resource, particularly going into the general meeting and people say, how does it work? And instead of going into some palaver, you say, here, read this.
I do actually, I'm happy to share it. So what I'll do is I'll just share my presentation with Karina, and then, because she's the comms queen in my mind, and she can make sure everyone gets a copy that wants it. I do think there would be really good value for the central party to actually hold some educational events in advance of general meetings, just so people come knowing what to expect, right? because otherwise people, if you're not a policy wonk that's been doing this for 10 years, you show up at this meeting and it's like mayhem. You're totally confused what's going on.
I just wanted to add as well that this meeting is being recorded and it will go up eventually. Likely the link will be on our website, bgosgreens.ca. And before we depart, if there's no other questions, I do have, oh, go ahead, Trina.
Sorry, Peter's got his hand up.
All right, I missed that, sorry.
I might have missed this. I'm sorry. I've had to be sort of in and out. At the phase 1 of the general meeting earlier this year in November, we didn't actually succeed in passing too many policies.
You're right.
And we have a whole pile of them. I don't know, something around 80 or 90. And having to do this and workshopping, I don't know if I'm sure somebody's thinking about this, but I haven't seen any evidence of there being thinking about how are we going to get through 80 or 90 policy, constitutional and bylaw type proposals. Do you know anything about the preparation for that?
Yeah, so actually the policy and development, the PDPC rather, sorry, is meeting on Sunday, and we've extensively I've listed extensively out kind of all the number of proposals that we have left. And the reason that I'm speaking like that, kind of with a bit of authority about that, is I was the policy lead on the virtual general meeting. So it kind of was in my bailiwick. So I have sort of mapped out how many proposals we have left and how much work I anticipate. And I think I'll be really honest with you, Peter. I think we need a full day on Saturday to get through the remaining green and yellow motions, to get them all through and then decide what's happening to them. And I think we would need a full day on Sunday of like multiple yellow lit workshops occurring simultaneously for 6 to 8 hours, for at least 6 hours. So yeah, it's a big load. It's I'm not really sure how easy it's going to be to get through it. I'm hopeful that maybe some consideration would be put in place to maybe look at creative solutions. Like, do we start to do work in advance like we did with the emergency motions? So I think one of the things that we'll be trying to sort out is the best way to do that. I know I'm exquisitely aware of how anxious members are to get their proposals through one way or another, you know. And I really feel for them. It's just a really difficult situation, particularly online, because it's just not a good forum.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. There was, of course, the project that was run by a number of volunteers called the Motion Mondays.
Yes.
Where there were a number of proposers came to the workshops and they presented their proposal to groups of people and workshopped it. They were very good sessions, but they were very, very, very feeble attendance. We had, you know, in one Motion Monday, we might have had 30 or 40 people in total and tried to run 4 workshops, for example.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that that model would be hugely helpful in trying to deal with some of the issues that we'd face. About 2 days of workshopping.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree.
And the other thing is, it's so hard for people to understand the process. Like, so much time was spent by people objecting to the chair doing this, that, and the other. And I think a lot of it was quite honest stuff. They weren't trying to delay things and so on, but effectively they delayed the procedures, mostly because people didn't understand what was going on. And it was very hard for the people who chaired. I must say, the chair people worked very well, and some were very, very impressive. They did a good job, but it still was confusing for people.
Yeah.
And that's another issue that somehow you're of course very aware of it. So yeah. I guess that'll be part of the discussion on Sunday, will it?
It sure will, Peter.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
And I hope to see you back helping us.
Yeah, I have to check on my calendar if I got the invitation for that.
Sybil, did you have another question?
If I can add really briefly, oh, sorry, and Sybil, you're muted. But if I can add really briefly, just if you know of anybody that's interested in volunteering for phase 2 of the GM, we're always happy to have, because Catherine and I also helped with that, one of our many hats, but we're always happy to have more volunteers. So if people are willing to help out, I'll put the email in the chat, but it's generalmeeting@greenparty.ca. And yeah, more volunteers are always much appreciated. So I'll put that in the chat.
And also, actually, what would be really helpful, just because of the volumes, is what it is you think you can actually help with. Like, it would be really helpful to know what skill set you think you could bring to the table, because that makes it really easy to match. Go ahead, Sybil.
You're talking about the Saturday and the Sunday, so I presume there is already a date for the convention, or?
Yeah, I think it's the Friday is March the 26th, I believe, is the Friday. So it would normally be the Friday evening, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. Oh, is it the 25th?
I believe it's
Friday?
the 25th.
Okay.
I'm pretty
sorry,
sure that's what they set out in the notification. So sorry. I hope it's the Friday. No, it should be. It should be.
Yeah. So it would be the Friday evening, all day Saturday, all day Sunday.
All right. Thank you very much, Catherine. Just before we close, or before any final questions, if there are any, I would appreciate if people can just type in the chat where they heard of the webinar. We posted this webinar on the hub. We posted it on our social media, as well as a bulk email. So if you could just type in there in the chat, then we can see where exactly people are hearing about this webinar. Secondly, this is the first of a series, so if you have any ideas of topics that you think would be great for our membership, again, please add that to the chat, and then we can get ready for our next webinar. So we'll give everybody a few minutes to do that, but while that is happening, is there any final questions for Catherine?
Yes, could I ask that I somehow be sent the information about the meeting on Sunday? Because I didn't get it somehow.
Oh, I think we haven't got the Zoom link organized yet. It's going to be,
okay.
It'll probably go out maybe tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks. But it's Sunday anyway.
It's on Sunday.
At what time?
I think we're going to have to rejig. It was originally at 2, and I think now we're rejigging it back to 1 o'clock because there's some conflict for the federal councillors, but it'll be early afternoon on Sunday.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
All right. Again, I thank everyone for participating and joining us, and I thank Catherine for taking the time to share her knowledge, and I hope it was informative to everyone as it was informative to me. And I hope to see everyone again in our next webinar. Thanks again, everyone. Have yourselves a good night.